Welcome to another episode of In Detail, where we take you behind the scenes of creative business. This is episode 2, season 1. I'm here with my friends Warwick, Mihaly and Mick Moloney, and we're here to discuss how to write the perfect fee proposal. Today's episode of In Detail was made possible with the help of our friends at Streamtime, who have developed team management software designed by and for the creative and design industries. We're fans of their dedication to the death of timesheets and their epically designed user-friendly interface. Our thanks go to the Streamtime team for supporting us while we lift the cone of silence on what running a creative business is really like. One of the things we've been chatting about with fee proposals is that it's there to solve problems, or it's there in the event that there is a problem, and even when there isn't a problem, it's your fee proposal's there to help you and your client and guide you along that process through the build. Warwick, would you like to comment on that?
Thanks, Kate. Glad to be here.
I'm Joe and Paul.
I just want to congratulate us all for how natural we are at this.
Yeah. It feels completely authentic.
I would like to comment on that, though, quite seriously.
Yeah. Of course you would. That's why I asked you. God.
Jesus.
I actually, years ago, one of our first clients was a lawyer, and I remember we got into a conversation about contracts and things, and she described it very elegantly, which was that a contract between two people or whatever is not about constraining the relationship and telling you what you can't do. It's about setting the base framework for that relationship. It's a starting point off which the actual relationship then launches, which, as we know, or I assume we all know, is much more about, the interpersonal connection and what you can kind of negotiate and manage with your clients rather than what's written on the paper.
Yeah, that's such a good big picture view of it all. And I think that the CAA, the Client Architect Agreement, that we all sort of come to use eventually, it sets that framework. But it also, if you're a client and you're coming to this for the first time, you've got no idea really what the nature of that relationship is going to be about or what it's not going to be about. Even things as simple as explaining the architectural stages of work and the things that are included in that. We always get clients that are like, what, you're going to pick all the light fittings?
So you think it's a document? You think it's a document that educates as well as...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it just
100%.
It gives this is why we send a lot of ours out with that a really initial thing. Like we talked about you guys call it a welcome pack. We just call it a client guide. But in ours, we send out a lot of that information at the start so that people can say, okay, well, this is a pretty significant cost of the build, but look at all the stuff we're getting. Look at this sort of list after list of things that will be done by the architect in each stage. And that's, I think, part of that setting of the scope as much as it is the terms of the relationship.
Do you have something like that, Oz?
Yeah, well, actually, you just made me think, Mick, about, how like when you go onto a car website and you can compare, or a computer website or whatever, and it just lists all the stuff that the car or the computer or whatever includes. Like it comes with color matched side view mirrors and a sunroof and a 6-speaker blah blah blah, and that options list ends up like validating the price point of the the machine that you're buying, and in a way, what it sounds like you produce does a similar thing. I think ours is kind of much more high level than that. I think we talk about the phases, and we talk about, the goal of the town planning phase is to do this, and this is the deliverables and so on. But it doesn't go into the minutiae of what we do.
We were
that's a good
like
thing or a
that.
bad thing.
We changed, and I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing either. It's really hard to measure this shit. That's one of the big things about fee proposals and this whole thing is that if you make a change or you say, okay, I'm going to try this out, it can take 4-5 years before you've worked out whether or not it was a good idea.
Oh, yeah. I feel so good when I add a little clause, to our T's and C's that protects us against something we've just learned on another project. Like, we're now like totally sorted. We'll never get screwed over on photography days or intellectual property or whatever.
Yeah.
But of course, wait a minute, there's all our current projects which do not have those T's and C's. Plus the next 2 years before it actually becomes relevant.
And you sort of hold your breath on those ones, hoping that doesn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
What about
that
you,
actually
Kate?
brings us into another, I guess, a broader framework for the discussion in that essentially the fee proposal in the same way that building a contract between the builder and the client is designed to sort of lock down a series of basic unknowns. So we've got one part of it is that the cost or the budget is largely unknown, and percentage fee and how you deal with that is one of those things. And then we've got, that the timeframes vary, that the relationship might change. And so that's what, locking in those things about the photography and things like that at the beginning is important for that. And then the clients themselves, like how they behave, they're always a can of worms every time. And so our framework is designed to give a bit of certainty to this arrangement. And I think maybe for some of this discussion, we might want to try and work out. I mean, you guys, every time I hear you talk about fee proposals, you have some little gem based on one of these things that helps work out some of those sort of unknowns.
I grew up on the street. I learned everything I know from hard days.
Bare knuckle architecture fighting.
In the hood.
Yeah.
In the hood, yeah.
When before Mick and I were actually just chatting about something that you have was something to do with fees and tender prices.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that? Sounds like a real winner of a clause.
Yeah, well, okay. So this is actually one of the things that has burnt us in the past, where we had a crazy. Well, so the context is that our fees are percentage based, and so in a way that means we live and die by whatever the construction industry says things are worth, and obviously we do our best to kind of manage that process, but we sometimes get surprised. And on one job, we had a project value where we were, we had advice and we, were certain, the price was, let's say $2 million for the build, and we got 2 or 3 tenders so close to that number that it was almost like we had gazed through a crystal ball, and we had one price at just over half that. And so we were then left with a situation of a percentage fee being based on a 1.2 million or whatever it was budget, not the 2 million, which really in retrospect was a fair price. And I say retrospect because we sort of maybe suspected some sort of, not necessarily shady deals, but that something was happening that made that 1.2 price. It was clear that it wasn't viable. Anyway, so we thought long and hard about this and went, well, how do we protect ourselves from that sort of weird lowball environment? And if you get a highball price from a tender, the client's never going to accept the one that's twice as much. So there's no point in it's almost like an invalidated sort of thing for you, for us. But the low one is the one that can really mess you around potentially. And so we just now say that our percentage fee is based on the average of tenders received. What if somebody us from both high ball and low ball prices?
Yeah. What if somebody cancels their project the day before the tender is due to come back?
Well, we've been caught out on that before as well. And
of course, you old dog.
The critical thing, right, is most architects, as I understand it, at small scale, use percentage fees. We've done that for decades as a profession. And so the question is, what happens if you get, if the market messes you around, or what do you do before you even hit the market? And so the key thing we now have in our agreement is that the fee is based off on your client. Our fee is based off on your budget to begin with, but as soon as we receive a cost estimate from a professional person, not yourself, basically, a third party, be it an approved builder or a quantity surveyor, we update our fee instantly to that number. Yep. And if that changes over the life of the project, we keep on updating and updating and updating. And that the tender itself, even if the client rejects the tender outcome, is evidence of the price point of the project. So we
You
had
mean,
previously
that
had this situation where it
tender
was
validates the
budget, cost estimate, contract price. The client refused to get a cost estimate for various reasons, and so we were working off this budget, which was totally inadequate. We never got an approved contract price, and so the client just totally rejected our claims that we should be paid based off received tenders, which were in line with our pricing advice, I should say as well. And we got burnt because we were left in this no man's land. Yep. And so now we say that every time you have this like little bit of extra pricing advice, it is the new truth.
Yep.
The new truth.
Yeah.
That's actually really good.
That's the new reality. Yeah.
Right.
So we encourage our clients. Well, we actually make it mandatory that we use B, C, and D cost plans from the quantity surveyor. So we're getting a cost plan B done at the end of concept design, C at the end of DD, and at town planning when we do our town planning at the end of DD, and then another pre-tender estimate from the QS because first of all, it's really good to have that something to benchmark your tenders, especially in the current climate where you've got lots of builders who are getting, way too busy and they can't, sometimes they'll pull out of a tender and you might only have one price there. So having a proper QS pre-tender estimate is very useful data. But it also, I think, sets up those expectations along the way, having multiple checkpoints along the way for the client to really keep their expectations of the budget in check. We've just found that it's brought even though they don't like paying for that advice along the way, because they know they're going to get it for free at the tender, and it's going to be a real price that they get at the tender. It gets everybody to simmer the fuck down a little bit during the process, and your expectations of what your building is going to cost are very well tempered by a professional cost plan.
Remind us to do a language warning at the beginning of this episode.
Warning for all those kids listening to this podcast about architecture.
No children.
What about you, Kate? How do you handle that sort of
We are in the process of moving from fixed fee to percentage based on these conversations that I've been having with you guys over the last, couple of months.
Wow.
Great.
Yeah, I just didn't have the confidence of how we could have that discussion. I didn't understand, how you approach it. And now that I think even Mick sort of having the estimate price is always in the invoice. And so you're just adjusting it every time based on the new truth, which I think makes a lot of sense. And if you were running your clients through that and taking them through the fee proposal at the beginning, then all of that would become clear. You're like, this is the system, this is the process, and everybody feels safe in that, and that's what your fee proposal is there to do. And one thing that I thought was really good was, Mick, when you were talking about your welcome pack client guide, how you do a sample fee that's not theirs. So you take the emotion out of it and then you have it itemised and can you sort of explain that again?
Yeah, so we have it's in the initial guide as well, where we say, okay, project X has a value of $1 million, and then we do the next line is the GST component of that so it's 1.1, and then the architectural fee is the percentage, and that's charged on the X GST price. So people can really start to see this being set out like a spreadsheet. And then we'll also include the consultants, so your building surveyor, your structural engineer, your land surveyors, all of those people that are going to be likely to be required for that project. And then we spit out an indicative total project cost at the end. And I think that it's just, to me, because we get this question, even though the client architect agreement and there's lots of sort of information out there that separates the construction estimate or forecast from the total project value. There's nothing like seeing a worked example of it to really drive that home.
And where do you put the GST in that? Have you had vision before where someone said, I want to charge GST and GST?
Yeah, so I think we talked about that last time, is that we don't want to be in a position where their clients are sort of saying, I've seen your fees 10%, but is that 10% of the inclusive GST cost or the exclusive? Because I don't want to pay my GST on GST, and which of course makes perfect sense. And so,
but it is kind of arbitrary because. Yeah, we do exactly the same thing that you do, and I presume Kate as well. Like you're sort of looking at the ex-GST amount.
Ex-GST, yeah.
But technically speaking, we could charge. Someone could come to you with a $500,000 budget and say we charge a percentage on, the current ASX value or something. Like it's a totally arbitrary construct.
Yeah. You could use the zodiac signs if you want, but
right.
I think
so whether or not it's not technically GST on GST, it's just a.
Well, the GST component of it, I think it all works out in the end, but I think there's this idea that people don't want to pay a tax on a tax.
Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah, so putting GST on the total price of petrol, for example, would be crazy because the most of the component of the petrol price is already a government tax, so you're taxing a tax.
Yeah.
But, or do they do that? I don't know. Is there GST on petrol?
No idea. Yeah, I'm sure there is. Because we claim it each month.
Language warning, Kate.
Actually, Kate, before we move on, I'm curious more. Can we drill down into your comment about switching from fixed to percentage?
Yeah.
Tell us more about that. Like, what do you see as the pros and cons of the way you've been doing it, and why you want to shift?
One of the pros of doing it this way is that as a younger practitioner with less experience in negotiating, it can be a lot. Whoa!
Well, what just happened?
I think our washing machine turned on upstairs, and now you can hear the.
We are keeping this in.
High quality recording studio. Yeah.
Yes.
Note. Couldn't afford lagging on the parts, guys. Yeah. So part of the sort of reluctance for me to use percentage-based fees was, firstly, we weren't getting the estimates at enough state. We weren't getting the estimates, so that's number one. So we couldn't base it on something that wasn't us. So that was the first challenge. Number two was that I didn't know how to have those conversations with people. And in my mind, if we were to turn around and say, "Listen, your build, I know your budget was 1.2, but now it's a $2 million build, and so you owe us 35 grand or whatever it is a really blunt and weird way of doing business. And I was like, I just can't see how we can make that work. And the answer is the fee proposal, and it is that client guide at the beginning and that example fee where you explain how the process works. And I think even just saying it's not about what I think your budget is or what you think the budget is. It's about a fair and reasonable estimate that comes from another party.
An expert.
Yeah. And
keep going.
No, that's it.
Well, that's another interesting one is that, if we're talking about the QS, and I often explain to the clients, I say the QS is the most important consultant in this, including the architect, in the entire project. If you can't afford to do this, then none of it will come. All of this will come to nothing. But you can have all the structural engineering and architecture in the world, but if you can't afford, if this does not stack up and you can't do this, that's the worst possible outcome because it's a waste of your money and everybody's effort. So I actually consider the QS to be the primary sort of consultant in the whole project to get you into that point of switching it between not viable to viable. But interestingly, operating in a smaller city, there's no QSs that we're aware of in Ballarat. And so we have to outsource ours to Melbourne, and people are always like, oh, is that Melbourne price going to be, accurate to our local pricing? We're like, yeah, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
But
we often get clients who say, no, I want my mate, the builder, to price this job. Have you guys had that?
Oh, yeah, all the time. And sometimes we encourage it alongside a QS or...
Alongside, not in substitution.
I don't know. My feeling on all this, like the broader conversation about the role of the QS and, the budget and the relationship to fees is, first and foremost, it's a negotiation. And I mentioned that the thing about the arbitrary construct of the relationship between price, construction budget and fee, because the only relationship that really technically exists between those things is what we say exists. And so that stems from us doing an analysis of what does it cost us to run our business?
Yep.
How much profit do we want to make? How much do we think we're worth? How much can we ask for? What is the market doing? And so we usually, the way we present the whole thing is not as a kind of an externalized exercise, but more as we have developed, we're quite transparent and we provide a fee curve as part of that welcome pack, which does limit our ability to manipulate that if we feel like a project's going to be more or less difficult or a client is going to be more or less difficult. We're kind of stuck to that hyper transparency from the beginning.
Yep.
Though I would say that we've had a lot of feedback over the years that's really valued. So it's C++.
Yeah.
But we say that curve has been tweaked over the years to make sure that there's always a fair kind of compensation for the work that we do based on your budget. And the budget is essentially a simple proxy for your scope, because we know that if you want to do a $500,000 reno versus a $1 million reno, there is a different amount of work for us. And so we have engineered this perfect curve to very carefully reflect the amount of work we have to do between those two things. And the answer is, it's true. I've been meaning for my blog to go back and count the number of fee curves we've had over the years, because it would be in the dozens.
Yeah, same with us.
Messing with it.
Yeah. But I got to the point with that work there where I thought, this sort of, it's presenting this veneer of science, but there's no real relationship, certainly to us, between one, we can't sit down and audit a job perfectly for every hour that we've spent on it and say, yes, we hit that number on that curve. I know you're a data head and you would have that at hand, but I've never got to the point where I've sat there and I've really analysed previous projects and I've gone, okay, so this one was 13.25%, and that actually reflected exactly how much effort and hours that went into that project.
No, I don't reckon that's just the spirit we take to it. Though I'm data head, absolutely. It's really more about, okay, we're running a business. The purpose of the business is to allow us to do meaningful work, but also to make a living. And I consider, as a general rule, architects are underpaid, and I would include myself in that general categorization. So if the goal is to constantly just try and improve that financial position, you can do it in one of two ways: spend less time delivering the same product or charge more for the same product. And we're really kind of trying to do both over the years. So it's not so much about working out whether or not 13.25% was the number. It's about working out whether or not this time round, could we ask for 13.5% rather than 13% and get a little bit more money through the door for the same sort of project to give us a bit more fat in our fee to do better work or to make more profit or whatever, just constantly nudging it, seeing how far the market will allow us to position ourselves financially to still win jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find that your clients ask you a lot of questions when they're trying to analyse your fee graph?
No. And I reckon
Sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say, I attribute that to the hyper transparency that we maintain, both from that early curve and, it basically, by giving them that curve even before we've prepared a fee proposal, they can go and do some, very fast maths, go, well, therefore, if my budget is $700,000, my fee is going to be, okay, it's going to be that.
Yep.
They can work it out. And then our fee then kind of basically reflects that, but, broken down or whatever. And then like you, in our invoicing, we always have the budget there and the relationship between that and our percentage and our fee. So it's all again, hyper transparent.
Yeah.
I reckon we would get way more questions if we broke our fee down into 100 pieces. And maybe we should. Maybe that would be better. To say, look, okay, you want a shadow diagram? Well, if the council wants one shadow diagram, we will charge you $500 for it. And if they want 6, we will charge you $3,000 for it. But then they're going to say, well, wait a minute, why do I need 6?
Yeah, and question every little bit.
And start questioning everything. It's like, the difference between a fixed price contract and a cost plus contract. The fixed price, you don't care how many bags of nails need to be bought. It's a builder's problem.
Yeah.
But if it's, if it's there to be asked, you ask. So I think the idea of that transparency coupled with simplicity is like a bit of a winning partnership.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the transparency is very important, but for us, we got so many questions about the graph, and as you said, we were redrawing that graph so many times as we our position within the profession adjusted. So did the graph to the point where it may have started off at sort of 20% or so, and then gone down to less than 10 at a $5 million job, but. Eventually, as we sort of worked out where our band of work sat, we weren't doing any 20% jobs because they had $50,000 budgets, and so we sort of found that we were sort of starting around about $500,000 or $600,000 for our smaller projects, and then capping out at $2 to $3 million for our bigger ones, and so that kind of brought the two ends of the graph a bit closer, and as we sort of were in a position where we could charge more as a company, the graph started to flatten out to a degree where it wasn't so much this beautiful paraboloid that you see on the fee graphs. It was more like this sort of just a fairly drab-looking straight line. So we, after looking at what some other big companies in Melbourne were doing, we just said, here's our number, and that just applies straight across the board. So that calculation that you can do as a client and say, okay, if it's a $1 million job, it's going to be $100,000 in fees. If it's a $2 million job, it's just $200,000 in fees. So that I think takes out an element of complexity from that, which in my mind is one of these sort of hurdles or these reasons to say no to a project at the start is, oh God, we don't even know how much it's going to cost. We've got to go back and do these sort of calculations, which to you and I mean, we're used to it all. It's just that the feedback we were getting is that this is a sort of a bizarre way to do business, and it's sort of unique to architects, nobody else. And even our consultants, really, they just give us a fee proposal with a number in it.
What are you planning on doing, Kate, with the new model? Are you going for us doing the sort of the curve, or Mick
Team
running
Mick.
number?
No.
Neither.
I'll just give him a number. I'm not really sure
Depending on
why
the client,
our clients are different, but the last, I reckon, probably 5 fee proposals we've put in for resi work have not even been questioned.
Yeah, ours almost never get questioned.
Never get questioned.
Occasionally,
I don't have to explain it. I just give them the number and they go, understood. And I think that's a lot to do with our position and our marketing and all of those kinds of things as well. But it's interesting because if they asked, I would be ready to answer that question. So we would run it through the time cost calculator for one, and then that tells us how many hours other architects are using on phases of a similar size project. So, for example, we did one where we did an airplane hangar.
Is that through the ACA?
Even though we're mostly resi firm. I don't know what they cost. I wouldn't, it's not my sort of field of expertise. And so I went on a completely different path to find the cost for that project and to check what I assumed my hours would be against a whole bunch of other things. And I, crossed it with percentage. I crossed it with asking other firms what they were charging for commercial work. I crossed it with time cost calculator. And so in the end, I had a number that I felt was reflective of the project that we were going to do and what the clients were after. And so I think we've now brought that process from costing that job into our resi work, and we check against all these different parameters to make sure that we think we've got the right fee. And then
get the airplane hangar gig? Yeah.
We actually, it was a full Stephen Bradbury. We did a tender that was supposed to be against 5 other architects. I don't even know why. A friend of ours asked us to be in it. We're like, we'll have a go at this. And then all the other ones fell over and we got the job.
They fell over in that
no one else submitted. They all ran out of time.
That sort of Stephen
there's some weird things that happened.
That's
we were the only ones in the EOI process at the end, so we won.
Nice.
Okay,
it's not like that moment in...
Is that an ACA tool?
It is an ACA tool. So
good question.
It's remember you can use that, and you put in your profit margin, you put in, the budget of the project and what, there's a whole series of parameters to check. And you also put in your overheads into there. So you can, if you're a young architect, you're making sure in that you're not undercutting your minimum. But obviously we know that you don't just do it for the cost that you do it for. You do it for the price that you can get it at. So that's where you start tweaking your profit margin in that. But it does mean if you need to show your clients how many hours other architects are spending on this kind of thing, you can produce this little printout that says all the other architects in Australia who use the time cost calculator in between 230 hours and 260 hours for documentation.
Yeah.
So we're somewhere in the middle of this. And then that helps them feel comfortable that your fee in your fee proposal is actually a reliable number.
Do you ever tell your clients, though, you're more in a position to answer this, Warwick, that all of this is a bit of a moot point anyway. If you look at the project, it's going to cost you 100%, right? If there wasn't an architect involved, and say 110% if you choose the architect who charges 10%. Mm-hmm. And then if another architect down the road is 11%, then you're talking about the difference between 110% and 111%. Or, from somewhere from 117% to 108%. Really, at the end of the day, in the total project costs, we're talking about bugger all.
Yeah. It's like if you sell a house for $1.5 million, so you want to sell it for $1.5 million and you end up selling it for $1.4995. You don't really worry about that, are you?
That's right,
so,
yeah. Whereas people are looking at these sort of thin margins between the choice between architects, and we're like, if the question, we've had a couple of people who've said, that 14% sounds too high or whatever it is, and we're like, that's fine. We don't really negotiate too much on our fees.
No.
But what we would encourage you to do would be to look at it in terms of the overall project cost, and we use that 114% analysis. But to us, we just say to the client, look, it's about getting the person that you like. That is far more important than 16.1% versus 15.3%.
Yeah.
That's basically irrelevant. If you get a great relationship and somebody who can listen to you and give you what you want, just choose that person.
And this is the reason why, as architects, it is really great that we are a collegiate profession and we share this information about our fees. Because I think once that fee proposal hits the desk, I don't think there's a person choosing between 5 of us at a variety of percentages. Likely at that point, they're going with you. Or they're going with maybe you and one other person that they dearly love as well. And so there is no reason why we wouldn't share this.
Yeah, I actually think that my percentage fee isn't the hurdle to signing on a project. It's because I tell the clients straight up that I reckon most of our projects are going to be about $4,000 a square metre or above. And that's the killer for most people. Yeah,
that's what we do too.
Yeah.
We either get rid of them or...
And that's the bad
bring them in the door.
And I can deliver that within about 10 minutes on the phone to people.
So
that we don't end up spending hours writing fee proposals. And we just say, look, we just need to, sort of make sure our expectations are aligned. And we say, if you're after a family home, somewhere between 200 to 250 square metres of house, take their brief and say, it sounds like it's going to be that sort of size. And then we say, look, we could do it, a bit less than 4,000. Some of our projects have been a bit less than that. With economy of scales, you can get down to 3,500 for a larger house. But at the end of the day, what you're talking about is going to be an $800,000 project, for example. Then the question over your percentage fee on that isn't really, you don't even get to that. They don't even get to the point where you're asking how much your fee is because they're either in the right ballpark or they're not.
Exactly. So on just a question, both of you. One of the other things apart from the budget or the cost of the project that the fee proposal deals with is the changing in relationships. So that is a complete variable that we don't have control over. And I mean, when we sit down and we meet someone and everything's great at the beginning of the project and we really hope that that's the relationship we have with our clients at the end, it is kind of an unknown. And I was thinking that your fee proposals would likely have clauses in there that sort of establish parameters for that relationship. And I was going to ask you about those. Like I think, Mick, you have one that's about photography at the end. That's a good one.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of projects where the clients have got to the end of it and said, look, we don't want to have our house photographed, and we feel as though that's kind of in many ways, it's our product and our and sort of the evidence of the fact that we know what we're doing. So we can encourage clients to sort of think about that as one of their roles as a patron of this art form is to allow their work, which has been produced for them, to be celebrated, and that often works, I think, to remind the clients of their sort of responsibility as a patron. And we also sort of gently remind them that this is how we make our money. We need to be able to show people what we do, and that's how our business is built. So in our contract with the client, we have a requirement for a few days at the end of the project to photograph the house, and we haven't found that many issues over the years with it, maybe one or two projects. But I think it's a nice one to establish that expectation at the start. And also even the expectation that we're doing this project for you, and we're going into this with the full expectation that this will be a masterpiece that we will want to photograph and preserve forever. And I think it sets the bar nice and high.
What about you, Warwick?
I was going to talk about the one of the changes we made years ago, which I still feel like is one of the best things we did for our agreement, speaks exactly to that question you had about that changing nature of the relationship. And that's to do with the deposit. So when we first started, we didn't charge a deposit. We used to have a clause in our agreement. It was called the termination fee. I remember speaking to people about it at the time. How do you calculate a termination fee? Is it a percentage of the work that you've already done, or a percentage of the work that has yet to be done? And the philosophy basically is, well, you're doing me out of, revenue moving forwards and profit, and therefore you have to take a penalty for not giving me that work anymore. That's kind of the idea of it. And I reckon in certain industries perhaps, or even different parts of the architectural industry, that would be totally fine, because it's just kind of almost like a poison pill type of arrangement. You kill this project and you still have to pay me for my lost revenue and lost profit. But in residential, we never, ever even asked for it, because as soon as that project dies, you're going to go back and say, oh, you have to pay me $5,000 for
Money,
killing
please.
the project? It's like
that thing again.
You're just lucky to not. You feel like, I want to get away from them. I don't want to get sued, or I don't want to. We just need to go.
Yeah.
And so it was there's a classic example of that. The idea of the contract setting up the framework for the relationship, abject failure, because it was not a clause that could ever be enacted in practice.
Yeah, so why bother?
Why bother? And so we got rid of it.
And replaced it with a deposit clause.
A non-refundable deposit clause.
And how do you find that?
Deposit clause.
And so, and I remember at the time there was, and even still, I know there are lots of architects who don't charge deposits, feel like it's somehow like immoral or something. But you think about how often we pay deposits on every other thing in our life. Why wouldn't you pay it for, pay it for a consultant? And there are lots of other consultants who do it as well. Like graphic designers do it and photographers do it. Like everyone does it. And so you call it a mobilisation fee or a deposit or whatever, but we charge a 5% deposit, and it's based off the starting budget. So if the budget changes, the deposit doesn't change. It's a nominal sum.
Yep.
And if the client...
5% of the whole fee?
5% of our fee, yeah.
Yep.
So if it was $100,000 fee, it'd be a $5,000 deposit. And the idea of that is that's kind of to cover us for, that bit of work that is already just there, always just there in the future that you haven't invoiced for.
Yeah.
A bit of research you've done for the stage 2 down the track about the fireplace or whatever that's just sitting there waiting to be enacted. You can't technically ask for, any part of that phase yet, but you've done the work. And if the project is killed before it's built, that money doesn't get returned. So it is a termination fee.
Yeah, an upfront termination fee.
And
so
either gets used or doesn't.
We did that, Warwick, and we did a few projects with the deposit, and it was one of these things about, it's like steering a cruise ship. You make that more small change and see what the result is later on. And we found that the projects that had the deposit when a few of them did go towards cancellation, people changed their minds about project and everything, the return of that deposit became very contentious and to the point where it was almost contributing to the things that led to the projects not continuing. The demise of the project. So we stopped doing it. So we went through that and then steered back to our original course, which is no deposits. And there's swings and roundabouts for it. I like the idea of a deposit because I find it's a bit of a bullshit detector too. Like if you have a client who says, I'm going to do this $1 million pub and they refuse to come up with $5,000 to mobilise the project, then you've got a pretty good understanding of how they're going to pay their fees in the long run. But at the same time, I think by not charging a deposit and by extending we invoice monthly and we extend all of our clients a 1 month credit, essentially, it could be $10,000 worth of work. And I think that's an incredibly generous gesture and a sort of a show of good faith in the project to provide that credit.
Not interested in good faith.
Ruthless.
I mean...
Well, it's not a very businessy thing to do. It's sort of like I live in this small town, and it's it's a nice thing to do for the community. But
it'll be on the front page of the Courier tomorrow. I can tell you that.
Mick and Jules
stitches
Moloney.
Someone up.
Yeah.
No deposit with these guys.
Yeah.
Doing it for the community.
Yeah.
Look, I guess.
Saying it out loud, it sounds ridiculously quaint. No other industry would allow you to go into $100,000 agreement with somebody and leave nothing on the table for one, a month worth of that work. That's insane.
Oh, look, I think in every one of these decisions, there's always got to be a consideration of the payoff. And I'm totally behind the philosophy of saying, well, I'm not going to ask for this $5,000, let's say that's what it is. But instead of not asking for that, I'm not doing it because I'm scared of not doing it. I'm not doing it. I think that's a bad reason to not do it because you're worried about the outcome. I think just
you got to
do
get over that.
If you're a young architect listening to this and you're going, I don't know if I should or not, just do it.
I'm going to upset my clients by billing them. They'll respect you more if you bill them.
If they'll respect you more,
the world works.
They've done this so many times more than you. These people, by the time they get to the point where they want to get an architect, they're commissioning somebody to design their house. They've made a ton of money, and they've been in business or they've been in the big bad world more so than an architect in their 20s. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. More so than an architect in their 40s.
Yeah.
But if the reason that you're not doing it is because you think that there's more value in the goodwill of not doing it than the $5,000, or if word gets around because you're in a smaller community and you feel like that's important, or maybe it's just like considered as a loss leader, like, doing... the way you treat that sort of early kind of marketing kind of process and the engagement you have with the client before they actually start paying you money. I don't believe in doing work for free, but I do believe in if this makes sense for you, doing work in a very kind of strategic way for non-financial gain. Like that's part of the deal.
Yep.
If that's what you want.
Yeah.
But that's not paying. Not charging someone. That's different. I think you're talking about being strategic. If you're not going to charge someone, it's going to be very strategic and you know exactly what you're going to get out of it and you're getting X out of it, as opposed to being like, I don't want to charge them because I don't want to upset them. Having a not upset client is not a reason to bill.
Oh, and it's just postponing.
That's not an outcome,
too. Yeah.
There's a fundamental exchange in business that I don't think I never got taught this, and I'm not even sure where I've picked it up over the years. But if you're going into business for yourself, by definition, that means you're taking a risk. And the thing you're risking, first and foremost, is probably your salary, your livelihood. There is absolutely no point in doing that unless there's a reward. Business is about taking a risk to receive a reward. If you're not cut out for that kind of exchange, you should get a job somewhere and get paid a reliable salary and therefore not take that risk. And as a consequence of that exchange, my philosophy is that, well, every single time we sign a fee proposal or write a fee proposal, we're taking a risk that the client's not going to screw us, that we're going to get paid every invoice. Or, no client ever comes back to you and says, you know what, I loved your work so much, I'm going to pay you 10% more.
You did a great job and you were worth it.
Yeah.
It's always in the other direction.
Yeah.
So if that is part of the deal, then I think it's incumbent upon us as business people to try and leverage our positions when we can to get paid better so that we can weather those storms when inevitably they arise in every kind of person's career. Otherwise, there's no reward. It's just risk.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. This concludes the end of our second episode on fee proposals, part 1. You can find us at our website at www.indetail.show or our Twitter handle at indetailshow. You can watch us on YouTube, and you can also find us at Warwick's truly wonderful blog, www.panphilo.com. That shouldn't be in there, guys.
little sneaky plug in there, Warwick, into the
Who
script.
wrote that?
I don't know.
I think what you were meaning to say was...
listen to us. We're everywhere in capitals.
We're everywhere.
Exactly.
Mick, I think just note to self, we can write anything we want and Kate will read it out.
Right. I think that's the real Ron Burgundy moment.
Ron Burgundy.
I saw it in
Fuck
capitals
yourself,
and I was like,
Mick.
Twitter!